Hello and welcome back to Unearth the Past, a brand new family history and genealogy podcast brought to you by me, Dr Michala Hulme. I hope you have had a good week and you have been getting in a bit of research. My research has been terrible this week. I'm not going to lie. The only good thing about this week is I've managed to grow a courgette in the garden. Research-wise, and I'll talk to you about this later, it's been pretty blooming awful. Anyway, that's enough of my moaning and my brick walls. This week, ladies and gentlemen, we are joined by a very special guest. Please welcome to the podcast, Mary McKee, Head of Digitisation and Content Publishing from Find My Past. Mary, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Michala, thank you so much for having me. I've been enjoying the episodes so far. So you've been doing a fantastic job with the podcast, and it's been just really interesting guests you've had in such variety too.
There are only two websites that I subscribe to. And if you listen, you'll know that one of them is Ancestry and the other one is Find My Past. I've been using Find My Past for years. There is so much that I like about it. And to start with, I really like you have such a friendly user interface. So when you go on, it's just so simple to search. And I love that when the results come back, the person I'm looking for on page 1, not on page 21, which is what I want when I'm working to the clock. So I love it. And thank you so much, Mary, for coming on and speaking to me about it.
And appreciate everything that you've said about Find My Past. I think, one of the key things you said there about a friendly user face, and that's perfect. That is what we love to hear. Is we do pride ourselves on the idea that we are a friendly site, and that's what we hear the most from some of our customers. So really, really appreciate that comment there. And the accurate results. I mean, with my role, I do work very closely with what we call our search team, and they're the ones working on, the search results and making sure that we're giving you the most accurate results possible. So they will be thrilled for me to pass this along to them. But yeah, accuracy is definitely a huge part of genealogy, finding that specific record that can kind of, open up a brand new branch for you or break down that wall that you've been hitting up against. And then the other thing with us is, we're publishing every single week. We're publishing brand new records and brand new newspapers every single week. So if you haven't gotten, the right record today, come back in a month and we might have it for you then.
You have dropped, is it rate books for Greater Manchester?
Yeah, so I think it's about a month ago. I don't know, time's distorted these days. But yeah, we did nearly 5 million rate books from the Greater Manchester area. And this is a project we've worked on. Gosh, I think we've been working on it for about 5 years with them. It's a digitization project with a consortium of Manchester archives. So we have, Manchester archives as well as Bolton and Wigan. So it's been a really kind of a long project, but we're very happy to see the end results coming out now with the rate books. We also, later this year, we're going to be releasing even more millions of electoral registers from the Manchester area, part of that same project. So millions of electoral registers.
Oh my goodness. Really? I love this. Oh my goodness. So, this week, Mary, I've had a terrible week researching. It's been awful. It's nearly driven me to drink, and I don't even drink. It has been that bad.
That's terrible.
I know. Drink or chocolate. And I'll be honest, I don't drink, but I eat a lot of chocolate. It was that bad yesterday. I procrastinated by baking bread. Honestly, I've never made bread in my life. I was like, I'm going to make a loaf. And it's all because of an electoral register that I need that I can't find. So honestly, listeners, I have not set this up at all. But Mary, if I just hang on for a few more months, are you saying that we are getting new electoral registers? Is it Greater Manchester, Manchester, that sort of area, similar to what we've done with the rate books?
Yeah, absolutely. So similar to the rate books, the same archive. So we've been in there digitizing both the rate books and the electoral registers. So it'll include just double checking my list here. Yeah, it is Bolton and Wigan. So across the Manchester area. So I do hope so is your research trouble in the Manchester area at the moment?
It is in the Greater Manchester area, yeah. And
I do have to say for the podcast listeners, we did not set this up at all.
no,
I hadn't informed you ahead of time that this is, that we're going to be releasing these electoral registers. So I'm really keen to hear later in the year what we've been able to unearth for you.
I just love it. So as soon as you drop those records, I went and I found all my ancestors on those records. It was absolutely amazing. So anybody, if you are in the Greater Manchester area and you have a relative and you are struggling to find them, or you just want to find a new record, you just want to find what they were doing, check out the Greater Manchester rate books. They are on Find My Past right now. I know we've mentioned Manchester Records before and Greater Manchester Records. You have a fantastic array of local records, don't you?
Absolutely. I think with those census records kind of help you to build the basis of your tree. And then once you want to go, okay, I want to go a step further. I want to build that story about this person. That's where you really want to start diving into real specific record sets. So when you're on Find My Past at the top navigation bar, you select search, and there's an option there for all records. And literally from the moment I've started with Find My Past about 9 years ago, this is my one thing I preach about to everyone is look at all record sets. And this is basically our card catalog for other type of users. So you go into all records and then you can just kind of start typing in. So if you're interested in Manchester, type in the word Manchester, and it'll bring up all of the records that are related to that area, or with that in its name. But then you might be interested specifically in Merchant Navy. So put that in, and that's the records that'll come up. You put in war, and you'll see the military records all come together. And any location, if you look up Yorkshire, you'll see the wide variety. We have a massive collection of Yorkshire records, or as well as Surrey records and Welsh records as well. So that's the great thing about the card catalog is you don't actually have to land on Find My Past knowing what it is that you're looking for. We'll help you on that journey and go to the all record sets and just even put in the name of the location, ideally from a county level. Most of our collections are organized by counties, so you could put that in. But then also we're talking a lot here about the English and Welsh records. I mean, we have a huge collection of Scottish Roman Catholic records, and we have one of the largest online collections of Irish records as well.
Something we haven't mentioned, and it's actually one of the many reasons that I subscribe to Find My Past, is the fact it lets you search the census by address. For me, that is really important because sometimes, we're not looking for individuals. I do a lot of work on the history of dwellings, of houses. People know that I've done quite a bit on guest houses in Blackpool, the front of postcards. And the fact you can search by address means you are able to search the census, not by a person, but you can track your house going back on the census. And I think that is a real key plus point for Find My Past to be able to do that.
Yeah, we did that. We did that specifically in response to what we were hearing from customers that were getting really into house history. I mean, House Through Time has really kind of ignited that type of a passion of going, what's the history of my house? And I moved house last year, and sitting behind me is a bundle of papers of house history information that I just don't have the time yet to dig into. And I know it's going to be a huge rabbit hole once I start, but it's fascinating to think about the generations of people that lived in the same dwelling before you. Why is the layout of the house the way it is? Could you have had a chef living there or a carpenter? I've heard a story of somebody discovered that they had a stonemason was living in their house, and it totally then opened up their eyes as to why there was such elaborate, decoration around the house, and it really kind of opened up that connection with the history of the house. So we saw a lot more customers were coming to us with this idea of wanting to look at an address. So I think we started with the 1911 census and started an address search with that. And now we've expanded it to all of them. So from 1841 to 1921, you can look up the address. You start the address search by looking up a street, and then you start to narrow it down by a house number after that. And you look at you search it by each individual census year as well. So say, for example, for 1921, you also come across sometimes where at some point your house could have been subdivided and there could have been two families in the house. So surprisingly, we do get customers coming back to us, particularly after the release of 21, who were a bit confused because they were saying, oh, there must have been a mistake somewhere or in the digitization process because there's two census returns for our house. And that was part of the enumeration process, was if there was two families in the same house, but there was also two entrances. It all had to do with the entrance. If you had your own entrance, you get your own form.
Well, I remember when it was just on the 1911 census, and many people who are listening to this podcast will know that the 1911 census is great because it actually tells you how many rooms the house had. So what I was doing was I was tracking the addresses of my ancestors who didn't necessarily live in 1911, but I was checking their addresses. I was then putting them into the 1911 census search bar to see what type of houses they lived in. So I was using the 1911 census to gauge what type of houses my ancestors were living in before and after the 1911 census. So I could figure out if it was 2 up, 2 down terrace, or if they'd come into a bit of money, Mary, and were living in a semi.
That's a really interesting approach. I haven't heard that before, and I haven't even thought of that myself. But yeah, it's definitely something that I'll recommend to more people about, even if, there's not somebody specific that you're looking for in 21 or 1911 to still keep checking out the address. That's great. Yeah, really good idea.
That's just because I'm really nosy. Honestly, I need to get out more. So we've spoke a bit about how you can use the address to basically research the history of a home, or find, sometimes, as we know, things get transcribed wrong. So it might be that you're not pulling up anything by doing a surname search. However, you can search by address and see, well, were they living there? And whoever's transcribed it, or the enumerator, when he's written it down, has just basically written it down wrong. So for me, using that address search has been really useful. Moving on. So what are your favourite Find My Past records? What are the records that that you love?
Well, I mean, I feel like every time I'm now talking about Find My Past, I have to talk about the 1921 census. But I do have to say it is really, because it is dear to my heart. I mean, I was part of the team kind of setting up the project. I remember walking into the studio, and I actually got to, handle the books myself, which does add that personal connection. At the moment, I'm actually doing my PhD with Birkbeck University, and surprise, it's on the 1921 census as well. Specifically, what I'm looking at is what I'm calling the graffiti on the census. So there's a lot of we would have saw in 1911. Everybody kind of knows about the suffragette campaign and the votes for women. But in 1921, there was a lot more of that. People asking Lloyd George to build houses. You have people that are talking about divorce, and they call it the rotten system of divorce. And there's some really heartbreaking stories as well, where I found some families had actually recorded the names of an individual, of a soldier who had died in the First World War, but they recorded their name on the census as if they were still part of the household. And then later, the enumerator crosses their name out to say that they're deceased. And it's, yeah, some of those are really heartbreaking, especially most often it's parents recording the name of a son on those. So that's what I'm kind of working on the most at the moment, is really diving into that. Also with 1921, I love the addition of the employment information. So
Yeah.
now you have the name of the employer, so you can piece together the kind of everybody that worked in the same factory or in the same local shop as well. I think that's really interesting, because in our lives, we know that your work is like a social hub. It's a whole second family for you. And to think about, like, I know friends, aren't usually in your family tree and being recorded there, but it's nice to note that relationship of somebody that you worked along, your ancestor worked alongside for 30 years in the same factory. That's kind of really fascinating social history there.
Can I just ask you, what is the process then of acquiring records? So how does that work? How do you come about and how do you come about getting records, and what is the decision process in terms of what records do you think would be good for the site, and are there records that maybe you think actually wouldn't be great?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very big, broad kind of question, and I think it all there's multiple layers to it. So there's one way that we would acquire records is a tender process. So something like 1921 or like the 1939 register, the National Archives know that they want these records digitized, so they put that out for public tender. But the local county offices do that as well. So you would have like Berkshire would do that, or Guernsey. They put out a public tender, and anybody, ourselves and anybody else can go forward to say we want to digitize these records for you. And we're often excited about a project like that. When you can get a large scale and really bed into a project for a while, it's great. And then after that, the next way is that we look at what we want to acquire next. I mean, we do have such a breadth of records now. We have most of England and Wales are covered. Scotland is still, there's still some patchy areas in Scotland that we want to kind of look at. So basically, the gaps is what we call it. Is like we review our collection on a pretty regular basis and go, okay, which areas have we not quite filled? Where is it that somebody could be finding a gap in their tree and we're not able to help? So that's the next step after that. And then the third step is actually considering our tree. We now have opened up kind of our tree data in the sense that you can do the tree to tree hinting. We have tree to tree searching now, so anybody can have access to about 4 million, I believe more actually, tree searches. So you can start searching individual members' trees and see what they have. And that's actually given us a lot of information as well about, okay, if you're coming to our site, where is it that you're looking for? Are you specifically looking for, do we have, a large collection of trees from the Norfolk area? Well, we want to make sure that our records are matching that for you. So that's kind of the process in terms of how we think about record licensing. Is there's sometimes a passion project or something really just interesting. We've done photo collections as well. So we also like to look at stuff that are contextual, stuff that adds that bit of color to your family tree. So with the Find My Past photo collection, we have incredible photos through our partnership with Reach PLC. So Reach owns the Daily Mirror newspaper, as well as hundreds of other newspaper titles. And we created an online photo collection, so you can look at like photographs from the Second World War, both the home front and both the war front. You can look at the Western Front there, as well as lots of regiments in even Africa and Asia as well. And even though, again, it comes back to the idea that maybe your ancestor's name isn't actually on the photo, but you can find the regiment pictures. You can find what it looked like to be on the home front in Essex, and look at the Women's Auxiliary Corps exercises and what do their uniforms look like. And I love those kind of collections that add a bit of color and social context to everything.
How long does it take? And I know you're probably going to say, how long is a piece of string? How long does it take? Let's use a 1921 census. Does it take for you to get those records, get them transcribed, and then get them digitized?
It really depends on the actual collection. So for example, 1921 was, it's a rare collection. You know, it was the largest digitization project ever completed between ourselves and the National Archives. So that
Wow.
was about 5 years in the making from the moment of actually winning the tender. So I actually think even longer because you have to go through a tender process as well to the actual launch. And there's multiple steps along the way. I mean, if we're starting a project, an original project, we'll say, as in we're the first ones going into the archive to create images of this material. So you have different steps. The first step is the image. Well, first step is assessment, making sure the material is stable enough to go through this digitization process. Do we need conservators involved or anybody like that? Then once we start to capture the image of the material, so say it's like a workhouse register, you know, so we go through the books, we're capturing images of that, usually with some kind of an overhead camera. After that, it then has to go for transcription. So we have multiple transcription partners that we use, goes through transcription. In between, there's a lot of quality control happening within our team. So we're checking the images. We check the transcription output. It then has to come back in house, and then our data developers then kind of weave together. You have the images and then you have the transcripts, and we got to make sure they all link up, and then we have to publish them. And even during the publishing process, there's a bit of curation, making sure the transcript layout totally makes sense to the individual, making sure that that all of the records are in a clear chronological order, and things like that. So there's a lot of steps along the way. Now, in terms of how long that takes, like I said, 1921 was 5 years.
Wow.
I've seen us turn around like a small project of workhouse records. We could do that within 6 months if we wanted to. It really depends on the size of the project and also the material itself. How delicate is it? How much work needs to be done with it to get it digitized as well.
Sorry to interrupt the podcast. If you are enjoying it and you would like to support the making of this podcast, please visit my Patreon account, which is www.patreon.com/Dr Michala Hulme. Also, please remember, if you are listening to the podcast, to download and also give us a little like if you are liking it. And if you are watching it on YouTube, please remember to subscribe and hit that like button. Anyway, back to the podcast. Another thing I love about Find My Past is your newspaper collection. Now, I'll be honest, I did slightly hyperventilate because you've changed the front end of it. It's gone very snazzy. And at first I thought, oh, what am I going to do? I slid down a wall. I don't like change. Literally, it's the friendliest change I've ever met in my life.
Yeah, the newspapers. I mean, I think when you asked before, what's my favorite kind of record set? So I think of newspapers as a wholly different entity, and it is definitely a passion of Find My Past. I think at the moment we have something around 68 million newspaper pages
Wow.
on Find My Past, but I would say if you're somebody that's listening to this in 2 or 3 months from now or years from now, that we have gone past that number for sure. We are publishing at an incredibly high rate for our newspapers, and that is down to our team. We have a digitization team in Boston Spa, and they're doing amazing work there. Just for reference, Boston Spa is in Yorkshire, and it's the site of the British Library. So we have a scanning studio on site at the British Library, right next to the National Newspaper Building. So that's how we're constantly getting through millions and millions of pages. And with the newspaper collection, I do very much appreciate your feedback on the search with that. And the Find My Past newspapers. It did need an update for the newspaper search. It had started to kind of lag behind the rest of the record search infrastructure. And as much as what you see when you come to the site, you can see visually it's different, but it's really the back end that we've changed that you really like, as a customer, you can't really see that. So for example, our name search, before you would search for a name, say it's Mary McKee, and it's searching the entire newspaper for Mary and McKee. But now we've made sure, like, if you put in that name search, put in Mary McKee in name, we are searching to make sure it has to be within 1 to 2 words of each other. So maybe
Brilliant.
it's Mary McKee or maybe it's Mary Elizabeth McKee, but we want to make sure that it is as close together as possible that we know for sure this is somebody's first and last name. Because you wouldn't want, you don't want that article to come back that Mary's mentioned at the beginning of the article and then John McKee's mentioned at the end of the article. It's so frustrating when you find that. So these are the types of developments that were actually happening in the background. I love the fact now we've updated that you can search for multiple names. So you can search just with a comma. So you could work, have Mary McKee, comma, Michala Hulme, all in the one search form, and keeping that all within the name criteria as well. So we know you're telling the search engine these are actual names, and there's a certain way that they should appear in the article. And then the other side of it, when you're coming into like the filters, we found that like with the older search, the filters were just kind of clogging everything up, especially people that are using this on their phone. I mean, Michala, I'm sure you're a bit like me, and we're sitting in front of our desktop all day, and this is our main way of looking at these things. But we find that like a vast majority of our customers are actually searching and doing their family history from their phone now. And that's another way we've redeveloped the newspaper search to help somebody that's using their phone, because there's nothing worse than when you're looking at a site on your phone and you can clearly see the site is not actually used. It's not developed for a phone because there's just so much menus and all kinds of things at the very top, and you gotta scroll, scroll, scroll to get away from that. So we wanted to simplify that experience as well and just make those filters quicker and easier to kind of come in and out of. When you're doing a newspaper search, you think, I'm going to narrow down this location and this year range. Actually, I'm going to take the year range out. I want to change the year range. I want to change the location. There's a lot of thought and process going into a search. So we wanted to make it quick and dynamic for you as well while you were doing that.
And can you still do, I imagine you can. I've not tried it because I was actually looking for a person when I used it yesterday. But can you still do the keyword search? So say, for example, you're not looking for a person, but I'm looking for an address. Can you just type in the address, if that makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. You don't need to use the name field at all. You can just use the keyword search in that sense. So you can look up just the location or an address, or look up, a particular ship that you wanna know more about. We did just update. We have a blog on the site, 15 top tips for newspaper search. And that actually, we've updated that to align with the changes that we made to newspaper search. So I highly recommend to anybody listening, if you're interested, to check that out.
What I'll do, I'll put a link to that in the description. So if anybody's listening and they want to check that out, I'll link it in the description. And then you'll be able to just click on the link and it'll take you to that blog. It sounds like a really worthy blog, because I think if you've not searched newspapers before, they can be quite daunting because there's so many of them and so many different newspapers. And obviously, the stories often would just spread throughout all the different newspapers. So you might just think, well, if my ancestor lived in Manchester, I'm just going to search Manchester newspapers, when in fact that story was probably covered by most of the country. So don't be surprised if it turned up in Essex, for example.
Yeah, I always recommend, like, that's actually the worst thing you can do, is to start
Yeah.
and go, well, my family's from, Essex, so I'm only going to search Essex newspapers. You would be surprised because sometimes there's a really slow news day. And so in a Colchester newspaper will pick up something that's happening in Cardiff, and you can, read about it all across the country. And it does seem, what I also would recommend is if you're searching for something, and in the newspapers, they would often repeat the article. So, but it looks similar, but it isn't always similar. So what I have found is I could be looking for something and I have 4 articles that look so much alike, but it's that one article that added that extra little bit of, like, mentioned he was 84 years old, or mentioned he's from X parish. And those are like those golden gems. Those such important details that you need for when you're building a family tree. Is if you can get that age or location more than anything. A birthplace is incredible to find. So sometimes in these newspaper articles, you will find that 1 out of the 5 identical articles will have something a little extra for you to discover.
And also, if you are looking in the newspapers, for example, I don't know, maybe a specific crime you are researching because you, like me, and you have criminal ancestors, or you just are really interested in crime, check out the police news, the illustrated police news, because you may just, on the off chance, get a cartoon sketch. I'll be honest with you, it's probably been somewhat sensationalized, but it's nevertheless fantastic sketch of the crime in the illustrated police news, again, which you can find on Find My Past. Do you have a favorite newspaper, or is that just me, Mary? Am I just that weird?
No, no, it's not. It's not weird at all. I think the Illustrated Police News, I mean, that is an incredible newspaper, and I do recommend, even if there's not something specific that you want to look up, just open up one of the issues of it and just read it from, just as if you're reading the paper today, just read it cover to cover. It's so sensationalized, and it's really just it shows really the shift in news in that late kind of 19th century period of that, like the big stories, the big scandals they wanted to tell. I also quite like an interesting one is the Pall Mall Gazette. It was very good, especially when there was changes to the divorce laws, and you can get some real juicy divorce cases in there. And speaking of like crime or court cases, anytime that you find your ancestor has turned up in court, and it can be frustrating because maybe you just found them on a prison register and it's just one line, it's just a name and a date and a location. And you're like, I want the whole story here. The newspaper is where you go. And like you said, it can go on and on as well. It'll be multiple issues about the one case and all the detail that you get but I think in terms of another kind of favorite newspaper, we did a fantastic collection of suffragette newspapers, which I found were really interesting. And it was interesting, especially like, so I did Irish women's history, and the suffragette period is a highly kind of studied period, and it is fascinating. Some of the newspapers like the Suffragette and the Vote that we have on Find My Past, and to read kind of the day-to-day activities. You can read the minutes of some of their local chapter meetings as well. It wasn't all, not every newspaper is just about what Emmeline Pankhurst is doing this week. You have loads of these individual groups. One of the societies that I started to look at was the Actresses League for Suffrage. And they used to put on these elaborate plays as well. And they would put on plays where, you would have 20 or 30 actresses participating, and they would all play or represent a different woman in history. You would have like Joan of Arc there, and Athena, and all, like, such a variety, Barbaga and everybody on the stage. And you can and it vividly describes the costumes as well. So it's almost as if you're there and you can like see all these women on stage together. And all of it was part of, like, it was fundraising too. And just some of the lesser known campaigns that you don't really know about, like women stopped paying taxes. They said, well, if I'm not a citizen, then you shouldn't be taxing me. And so you see, again, you'll also see them in the crime reports too, because now they're in trouble for not paying their taxes. So the suffragette collection, I think, is interesting. And we've also released over the last maybe 5 or 6 years, we kind of started a lot more international titles. So you can find newspapers like the Royal Gazette of Jamaica. We have the Homeland Mail as well. So you can, from India. We have newspapers from Belize and Canada and China. And with those really stretch out, and you can start to see a lot more of, the British Commonwealth. And again, if you're looking, specifically for family history, they often detail births, marriages, and deaths that happen abroad. They will also mention the names of passengers, who's just arrived in India this week. So they'll actually have the full names and the family that came together. So those are quite interesting too.
I don't have anything to bribe you with, unfortunately, like chocolate at the moment, or a cake. But are there any records that that will be getting released this year that you can share with us that we should be excited about, Mary? That we should be, putting a little star in our diary, thinking these are coming up over the next few months? Anything for us to look out for?
Yeah, I mean, we're really continuing with a lot that we've come to be known for. Our Catholic collection is going to keep growing. At the moment, we're in Cardiff at the moment, scanning records there. Leeds as well. So we've working with the or the Diocese of Leeds and the Diocese of Cardiff as well. So expect those to come. So there'll be, yeah, at the moment, I think we have around 30 million Catholic records. That includes, the Scottish Catholic collection too. So we're going to continuously add to that. We're also looking at census improvements. We are definitely the place to be for if you want census records. So at the moment, we're looking at the 1871 census, going back through that and combing out a lot more about birth information, about occupations as well. Because I think that a lot of these records, particularly like the staple ones that we know so well, were originally digitized, about 10 years ago or longer. So the technology has changed now. So we do need to go back and we need to revisit these older record sets to make sure we're getting the most out of them and you're able to find everything that you need. This week we've just re-released the 1911 Irish census. So again, going back through that was digitized years ago. So we're going back through and cleaning up a lot of the birth data, the birthplace data, and we also transcribed for the first time an additional 5,000 records from 1911 Irish census that was never transcribed in the first run. So we have 5,000 brand new Irish census records that had never been released before. So those are online for you to search now. And after that, I mean, we'll have just broad strokes, more military records. We have some really interesting stuff coming out of Coventry as well. So I'm excited about putting together a large Coventry release. Hopefully later this year, maybe early next year, you'll see that as well.
So it seems like that's something that maybe, we don't see when we click on, we just see the big releases, but it seems like all the time behind the scenes, you guys are thinking of ways that you can improve the records, rescanning stuff, putting them through new systems. So there's certainly a lot of stuff that you don't see, isn't there? That is constantly, I imagine, like what you said, re-looking at the records, going on behind the scenes, and making it easier, I suppose, for us to research and maybe give us slightly more accurate results. One of the key plus points, I think, for Find My Past is the accuracy of the searches. I like to go on, search a record, and that record often can be found on the first page.
That's fantastic. That is great to hear. And I think as well, like also when you're searching with Find My Past, I mean, a lot of people might try and do search all records, and you can search everything that we have on the site all at one time. So billions of records you're searching at once. And then on the left-hand side, start to narrow down at that point. You, of course, narrow down to your location. Is it Britain? Is it Ireland? Is it America? That's a key thing to narrow down because you don't want to, don't want to be looking for somebody in Essex and find somebody in Essex, Canada, or something like that. But then I think as well, I think we were talking, kind of thinking back at the beginning of this, we were talking about like, where should we go at the start? But I think once you've kind of bedded in and you've started, you've got your tree outlined, start looking at those strange categories that you don't really look at very often. So step away from the births, marriage, and deaths and the census records and start going into the institutional records. You have like the workhouse records. We just released another, I think around 250,000 school records a few weeks ago. So school records are a fantastic collection as well. So you could look at those. And then after that, then of course the military collection, you can go into that. And again, the military collection, similar to what I mentioned with newspapers, you might look up somebody and it might look like there's 4 records there that are, oh, this is the same person coming up in the same type of record. But do look at each one. There is a reason why we have put multiple copies on, because sometimes you might find a service file and then you'll find, the burnt service file. You might find a second one that has an extra page in it and that has a little bit more detail for you. And then, yeah, even more employee records, workhouse records, things like that. It's all of those kind of juicy side records that create the story about your ancestor.
One last thing as well, with birth records, you actually have the mother's maiden name. On most of them, I think I'll be honest, on all of mine, but on most of them that I've come across, you have the mother's maiden name, which not all sites do that. A lot of sites do have, sorry, the civil registration index on there, but it doesn't always show you what the mother's maiden name is. So I think that's really useful. The fact that not only have you got the civil registration index, but you can also see the mother's maiden name, which will then help you to go further back into your family's history.
Yeah, mother's maiden name is such a vital piece of information. Now, it is only available from about the mid-8th century onwards. So the earlier civil registration, at the beginning of civil registration, that won't be available for it. But yeah, that is a vital piece of information. And Michaela, we've talked before about trying to find the women in your family tree and how difficult it can be as well, because and the name change is a big deal. And I even have to constantly remind myself if I'm researching someone and I'm starting to look them up and I need to remember, oh wait, no, I've come to find this person when they're married. So I need to figure this out and find that birth record and find their maiden name somehow. Which often you can do that sometimes and through the marriage record. And then I guess another thought of if you are, just coming to family history and, you're using Find My Past or any of the sites, those civil records, I can't actually stress how important it is to actually order the original record. You do have to go to the General Register office to order that original certificate. You won't be able to find that online. We do have the index to help you with that ordering process. But yeah, getting that original certificate is critical for your family tree.
Especially when you're starting off, folks. I've come across so many family trees, even some TV research where the actual birth, marriage, and death records were not ordered, and people have gone up the wrong family tree and they've spent years researching it, and it's not even the right family. It's a pain because it's expensive. If you're ordering an actual physical copy, it's £11. Unfortunately, there's not a lot we can't do a lot with that. It is what it is.
It does, and you'll get past that point as well. I mean, I've a branch that I'm researching, and just yesterday I was looking at it, and I think I might have to order 4 different certificates because I still don't know where exactly this person was born, and it's all the other factors are lining up, but I might have to just bite the bullet and order all 4 of them to find the exact person that I want. But the best thing is, though, once you get past, once you can kind of use those civil certificates and get past, say, to around, 1919, then you'll start to branch into the parish registers. And that's where, that's where you can really you don't have to order certificates anymore. You're in the parish registers at that point, and you can start tracing the line through those. But it is just getting back to that point. And the reason why I say around 1919, well, even to 1922 now, because with the parish registers, we will have the 100-year rule for data protection on the birth records. So we're only allowed, and that's by law, we're only allowed to publish up to a certain point with the parish registers. That's our agreement with whether it's an archdiocese or a local county record office. That's how that process works. So those civil certificates, hopefully you don't have to order too many. But once you get past that point, then that's where, access to exclusive parish records on Find My Past become really critical and really worthwhile of getting through that. And then you have the census records on top of it.
So, Mary, I always ask my guests this question, and I always say it's one question, and it's not. It's about 14 that I try and make it seem like it's one question. So, if you could invite anybody from your family tree round for dinner tonight, what would you cook them and what would you ask them?
Wow.
It can be absolutely anybody in your family tree.
Oh gosh, can I have 2? I don't want to
Of
invite
course you
two.
can. Yeah, there's no rule here.
I mean, I guess my initial thought would be, my dad passed away 18 years ago, so initially I would say, okay, I'll have to invite him, and I guess what I would cook, I would cook a meatloaf and mashed
Okay.
potatoes. That was a family favorite.
I was going to say, we've not had meatloaf before. That's a new one for the podcast.
I would say so. I feel like it's a very American thing. Yeah. So I would have to cook meatloaf. And then I guess if I was so cheeky and I was able to have a second one, I would invite my great grandmother on my father's side, Clara. And she migrated from Germany to Philadelphia. And I would I think I would just love to kind of really understand what that was like. You know, why did you decide to make that journey? You know, she was so young as well, and you know, it must have been such a harrowing experience at that time. You know, months on a ship to try and get to Philadelphia, and what was it like when you landed there? In terms of what I would cook, gosh, I don't know. What would a 19th century German woman eat? I have no idea. My German cuisine is not very good. I have no idea. So I would probably end up just making maybe a nice roast dinner at that point.
Oh, my favourite. Can you let me know when this is happening? Because I'm
Yes,
definitely coming round for that roast dinner, Mary. I'm all over it.
absolutely. Yeah, you're more than welcome. Anytime you're in Northern Ireland, let me know and I'll make a roast dinner.
You know what? I was actually in Northern Ireland filming Adrian Dunbar's and Neil Morris's family tree. Had I have known, I'd have come and knocked on. So that is it for this week's podcast. A massive, massive thank you to my guest, Mary McKee, Head of Digitisation and Content Publishing Operations from Find My Past. Thank you so much, Mary, for being on the podcast. And thank you to you, to every single person that has downloaded the podcast or watched it on YouTube. I really, really appreciate it. I know that we have listeners in the United States, Australia, Ireland, Germany, Turkey, New Zealand, France, South Africa, Canada, as well as over here in the UK. So thank you to every single one of you. If you haven't done so already, please remember to download the podcast. And if you're watching it on YouTube, please remember to subscribe and give us a like if you are enjoying it. These things really do matter. So thank you very much, and I shall see you again next week. Have a good week researching. Bye.